The signal came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It drifted through the black silence of deep space, a thin thread of sound wrapped in old human code. It was weak. It was broken. It sounded like a cry for help. Grand Marshal Vorak of the Zoranth Armada leaned forward in his command chair when the signal reached his flagship, the Devouring Storm. His eyes, 3 of them, narrowed as he listened to the translation. It was a distress call, a human distress call. Words like, "Help us," and "We are dying," and "Please, anyone," repeated over and over, buried under static, as if the sender barely had enough power to send it at all. Vorak had seen 1,000 worlds beg like this before. He had watched species kneel, watched their cities burn, watched their leaders offer everything they had, just to be spared for one more day. It never worked. The Zoranth did not spare anyone. They only conquered, and they only grew stronger. "Play it again," Vorak said. His communications officer, a thin creature named Sketh, replayed the signal. The voice was human, definitely human, and it was afraid. It spoke of a colony called New Haven, somewhere on the edge of known space, a small settlement of farmers and engineers who had no weapons, no shields, no fleet to protect them. The voice begged for rescue from raiders, not knowing that something far worse than raiders was now listening. Vorak smiled. It was a cruel smile, the kind that came easily to someone who had never lost a war. "Humans," he said, almost with amusement. "I have heard of this species. Young, loud, foolish. They fought us once, decades ago, at the edge of the Perseus Arm. They lost badly. Since then they have hidden themselves away, licking their wounds, hoping we would forget about them." Sketh tilted his narrow head. "Should we ignore the signal, Grand Marshal? It could be a trap." Vorak laughed, a short, sharp sound. "A trap? From humans? They do not have the ships for a trap. They do not have the numbers. This signal is real. It is a weak colony, begging for help that will never come from its own people. We will answer it instead. We will find this New Haven, and we will take it, and every human world nearby will hear what happened, and they will learn to fear us all over again." He turned to his fleet controller. "Set a course. Bring the full armada. I want every ship we have in this sector to follow this signal to its source. Let the humans see what real power looks like." The order rippled through the Zoranth Armada like a wave. 300 warships turned as one, their engines flaring to life, cutting new paths through the stars. It was the largest force the Zoranth had gathered in this region in years. Warships bristling with cannons, carriers packed with soldiers, command ships layered in armor thick enough to survive a moon falling on them. And at the front of it all, the Devouring Storm, a vessel so large it could swallow a city whole. They followed the signal like hounds on a scent, eager, hungry, certain of an easy victory. What Vorak did not know, what none of the Zoranth knew, was that the signal was not sent by a dying colony at all. 10 light-years away, in a hidden bunker buried deep beneath the surface of a moon called Ashfall, a woman named Admiral Elena Cross watched a screen light up with a single word. "Confirmed." She let out a breath she had been holding for 3 days. "They took the bait," she said quietly. Around her, a room full of officers and engineers erupted into quiet, controlled celebration. No cheering, no shouting. They had learned long ago that celebration too early was a mistake, but there were nods, and tired smiles, and hands clasped on shoulders. Elena Cross was 51 years old, with gray hair pulled back tightly and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had been a young officer during the first war with the Zoranth, the one humanity had lost so badly that entire fleets were wiped from the stars in a single afternoon. She remembered the reports. She remembered the silence that followed, the silence of a species that suddenly understood it was not alone in the universe, and that the universe did not care whether it lived or died. That silence had lasted 20 years. 20 years of hiding, rebuilding, and planning. Standing beside her was Marcus Reyes, the chief architect of the plan now unfolding across the stars. He was younger than Elena, in his late 30s, with the restless energy of someone who had spent most of his adult life buried in blueprints and simulations. He did not look like a soldier. He looked like a man who had not slept properly in a decade, because that was close to the truth. "The signal worked exactly the way we modeled it," Marcus said, staring at the tracking display. Hundreds of small dots, representing the Xoranth Armada, were now moving steadily toward a system called Meridian Drift. Their sensors picked it up 8 days ago. They spent 2 days verifying it wasn't a trick. Then they decided we were too weak to fake something like this. Because we are supposed to be weak, Elena said. That was the whole point. She thought back to the meeting, 3 years earlier, when this plan had first been proposed. It had sounded insane at the time. Fake a colony. Fake a distress call. Let it leak, slowly, carefully, into channels the Xoranth were known to monitor. Make it look accidental. Make it look real. And then wait. For months, maybe years, until an armada large enough to matter took the bait and followed it into a trap built specifically to destroy them. Most of the council had said it would never work. The Xoranth were too disciplined, too careful, too experienced to fall for something so simple. But Marcus had pointed out something the council had missed. The Xoranth were not careful because they were cautious. They were careless because they were confident. They had never lost a war against a species they considered inferior, and after the first war, they considered humanity thoroughly inferior. Overconfidence was not a flaw the Xoranth could fix, because it was the very thing that made them who they were. They believed they were the strongest power in this part of the galaxy, and belief like that made a species blind in exactly the way humanity needed them to be blind. "Show me the numbers again," Elena said. Marcus pulled up a new display. 312 Xoranth warships, moving in a loose formation, confident, unafraid, heading directly for the system of Meridian Drift. It was a dead system, as far as any outside sensor could tell. A red dwarf star, a scattering of lifeless rock, and an asteroid belt thick enough to hide almost anything. That was exactly why humanity had chosen it, 4 years ago, as the site of the single largest secret construction project in the history of the species. Beneath those asteroids, hidden inside hollowed-out rock and layers of stealth plating that bent light and swallowed sensor pulses, was the Iron Veil. It had started as an idea scratched onto a napkin by a tired engineer during a late-night meeting. It had grown, over 4 years, hundreds of thousands of workers, and more resources than most nations had ever spent on a single project, into something far larger. A network of hidden mines, each one powerful enough to cripple a warship in a single blast. Cloaked defense platforms, disguised as drifting rock, packed with weapons that could tear through Xoranth armor. Gravity disruptors buried in the asteroid field, capable of yanking incoming ships off course and smashing them into each other. And beneath it all, hidden in the deepest part of the belt, an entire fleet of human warships, silent, powered down, waiting. It was not meant to be an even fight. It was meant to be a slaughter, only this time, humanity intended to be on the winning side of it. "How long until they arrive?" Elena asked. "At their current speed, 6 days," Marcus said. "Maybe 7, if they slow down to scan the system more carefully before entering. But based on their pattern so far, I don't think they will. They believe there's nothing here worth being careful about." Elena nodded slowly. 6 days. 6 days to make sure every trap was set, every ship was ready, every soldier understood exactly what was at stake. She turned to the room. "I want a full systems check on every mine, every platform, every disruptor in the Iron Veil. I want 0 failures. If even one part of this trap doesn't work the way it's supposed to, we could lose everything we've built, and everyone we've brought here." "Yes, Admiral," came the reply, from a dozen voices at once. As the room burst into quiet, focused activity, Marcus stepped closer to Elena, lowering his voice. "You know this is bigger than just winning one battle," he said. "I know," Elena said. "If this works, it's not just a victory. It's a message. It tells every species out there, including the Xoranth, that humanity is not something you can walk over anymore. It changes everything." Elena looked at the display again, at the slow crawl of 300 enemy warships heading straight for a trap they could not see. "And if it fails," she said quietly, "it might be the last message we ever send." Marcus didn't answer that. There wasn't a good answer to give. Far above them, in the orbit of Ashfall, a fleet of human ships waited in the dark, engines cold, sensors dimmed, crews standing by in silence. These were the ships that would eventually move to Meridian Drift to reinforce the trap in its final hours, slipping in behind the cover of the asteroid field's natural sensor noise. A Among them was the Resolute, a heavy cruiser commanded by a young captain named Aiden Cole. Aiden was 32 years old, and this would be the largest battle of his career. He had trained for this exact mission for the last 18 months, running simulation after simulation, learning every detail of the Iron Veil's defenses, memorizing the timing windows down to the second. He stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the same tracking display that Elena and Marcus were watching far below. 312 ships, said his first officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Priya Malhotra. That's more than we expected. It's within the range Marcus predicted, Aiden said, barely, but it's still more firepower than humanity has ever faced at once. Are you worried? Aiden thought about the question for a moment before answering honestly. Yes, he said. But I trust the plan. I trust the people who built it. And I trust what happens when 300 overconfident ships fly straight into a field of hidden mines and cloaked guns, thinking they're chasing a dying colony. Priya allowed herself a small, grim smile. Poor bait. There is no bait, Aiden said. New Haven doesn't exist. It never did. Just a name, a story, and a signal designed by people smarter than any of us. Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening on dozens of ships. Soldiers checking weapons they had checked 100 times before. Engineers running final diagnostics on systems they had built with their own hands. Pilots sitting in the dark, staring at the stars, thinking about home, about the families some of them had lost in the First War, about the chance, finally, to make sure it never happened again. Back on Ashfall, deep in the command bunker, Elena Cross stood alone for a moment, after the room had emptied, staring at the map of Meridian Drift and the slow, steady approach of the Zoranth Armada. She thought about the First War. She thought about the day humanity's fleet had been broken apart in a matter of hours, the day entire star systems had gone dark because there was no one left to answer the calls for help. She thought about the years afterward, the fear, the quiet desperation as humanity rebuilt itself in secret, terrified that the Zoranth might return at any moment and finish what they had started. They had returned, just not the way anyone expected. This time, humanity was not going to wait to be found. This time, they had built the trap, written the bait, and set the stage. This time, it was the Zoranth who were walking, confident and unaware, into a war they did not know they were fighting. Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. Come on then, she whispered to the display, to the slow crawl of enemy ships heading toward the asteroid field of Meridian Drift. Come and see what we built while you weren't watching. 6 days. 6 days until the largest ambush in human history would either save the species or end it completely. Far out among the stars, Grand Marshal Vorak stood at the front of his bridge, watching the same stretch of space from the other direction, utterly certain that he was flying toward an easy victory, utterly certain that the weak, broken signal calling for help was exactly what it appeared to be. He had no idea that every star he passed, every quiet stretch of empty space, was bringing him closer to a trap that humanity had spent 4 years, countless lives, and everything they had left, preparing just for him. Later that night, if night could be said to exist inside a starship moving through the endless dark, Vorak retired to his private quarters and pulled up the old records of the First War with humanity. He had not looked at them in years. There had been no reason to. Humanity had been broken, scattered, and reduced to hiding in the shadows of the galaxy, and broken species did not require ongoing study. Still, something about the timing of this signal nagged at him, a small itch at the back of his mind that refused to go away, no matter how many times he told himself it was nothing. The records showed a species that had fought with desperate, disorganized courage during the First War, throwing outdated ships and untrained crews against a Zoranth fleet that outclassed them in nearly every way. They had lost badly, as expected. Entire fleets destroyed within days, colonies burned, and then, silence. Humanity had withdrawn deep into their own territory and simply stopped appearing on Zoranth sensors, as though they had given up entirely, or perhaps had simply been too afraid to risk another confrontation. Vorak had always assumed the second explanation. Now, staring at the old battle reports, he allowed himself, for just a moment, to consider the first. What if humanity had not given up at all? What if they had spent those 20 years of silence, doing something else entirely? He dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it arrived. It was not in the nature of a young, primitive species to plan on such a scale. The Zoranth themselves had needed centuries to develop their current level of technology and military discipline. Humanity had barely existed as a spacefaring civilization for 200 years. The idea that they could build something capable of threatening a Zoranth armada in secret, without any hint of it reaching Zoranth intelligence networks, seemed almost laughably unlikely. And yet the itch remained. He closed the records and told himself he was simply tired from the long journey. There would be time enough to worry about hidden dangers once his scouts confirmed there was nothing to worry about at all. Elsewhere on the devouring storm, in the crowded barracks deck where thousands of Zoranth soldiers slept between shifts, a young soldier named Scar lay awake, staring at the metal ceiling above his bunk. He had joined the Armada only a year earlier, eager to prove himself in the kind of glorious battle his older brothers had described from their own service. So far, his experience of Zoranth military life had been almost entirely uneventful, long stretches of travel between minor skirmishes, most of which ended before he ever had the chance to fire a weapon in anger. He had heard the rumors already, the way rumors always spread faster through a ship than any official announcement. They were chasing a human distress signal. Some of the older soldiers laughed about it, telling stories of the First War, of humans who had fought like cornered animals but died just as easily as anyone else once the Zoranth brought their full strength to bear. Scar wanted to believe those stories. He wanted to believe that this next battle, whatever it turned out to be, would finally give him the chance to prove himself worthy of his family's long history of service. But some small part of him, buried deep beneath the eagerness and pride, wondered what kind of species could survive a war that had supposedly ended in total defeat, only to vanish so completely that not even Zoranth intelligence could say for certain what they had been doing for the last 20 years. He pushed the thought aside and closed his eyes, telling himself that whatever waited for them at the end of this signal, it would be nothing the mighty Zoranth Armada could not handle. Back on Ashfall, deep beneath the surface of the quiet moon, the command bunker never truly slept. Shifts rotated through around the clock, officers and engineers working in relays to keep every part of the plan moving forward without pause. Elena Cross allowed herself only a few hours of rest each night, and even then, sleep came slowly, filled with old memories of the First War that refused to stay buried. She remembered, most clearly, the day the news had reached her that her younger brother's ship had been destroyed somewhere near the edge of human territory, one of hundreds of similar reports that had flooded in during those final, desperate weeks of the war. She had been only 23 years old at the time, a junior officer with barely any real combat experience, watching the war end not in surrender, but in humanity, simply running out of ships to lose. The Zoranth had not pursued them into their remaining territory. No one had ever fully understood why, though there were theories, some more comforting than others. Perhaps the Zoranth had judged humanity too insignificant to bother finishing off. Perhaps they had other conflicts elsewhere that demanded their attention. Perhaps they had simply assumed, correctly at the time, that a broken, demoralized humanity posed no further threat worth the resources required to eliminate them completely. Whatever the reason, that pause had given humanity exactly what it needed most: time. Elena had spent the following 2 decades watching that time be used more wisely than she ever could have imagined as a grieving young officer. Scientists who had once worked on purely civilian projects were quietly redirected toward military research. Engineers who had built ordinary infrastructure found themselves designing weapons and defenses far beyond anything humanity had possessed before the First War. And slowly, carefully, in secret, a plan had begun to take shape, one that would eventually become the Iron Veil. She thought of all of this as she stared up at the ceiling of her small, sparse quarters, unable to sleep, her mind endlessly replaying every detail of the plan, searching for weaknesses, for anything that might have been overlooked. There was nothing more to check. Every system had been tested, retested, and tested again. Every contingency had been planned for as thoroughly as human minds could manage. All that remained now was to wait, and to trust that 4 years of preparation would be enough. She finally drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with the distant echo of an old distress signal, calling out across the stars, drawing an unsuspecting armada ever closer to the trap waiting to receive them. The armada moved on, confident and unaware, following a human signal straight toward Earth's trap. 3 days had passed since the Zoranth armada changed course. And inside the asteroid field of Meridian Drift, humanity worked without rest. The Iron Veil was not finished. It had never truly been finished, not in the way a normal project is finished. It had been built, tested, rebuilt, and improved for 4 straight years, and even now, with the enemy fleet only 3 days away, engineers were still crawling through tunnels, cut into hollow rock, tightening bolts, checking wiring, praying that everything they had built would work exactly as planned when the moment finally came. Deep inside one of the larger asteroids, a woman named Dr. Naomi Osei floated in zero gravity, her hands moving quickly across the control panel of Mine Cluster 7. She was one of the lead engineers of the Iron Veil, and she had spent more hours inside these tunnels than she had spent in her own home over the last 2 years. "Status report," she said into her comm, her voice steady, despite the tiredness in her eyes. "Cluster 7 is at 98% readiness," came the reply from her assistant, a young engineer named Tomas. "2 mines are still showing power fluctuations. We're working on it." "We have 3 days," Naomi said. "Get it to 100. "Yes, doctor." She pushed off from the wall and floated further into the tunnel, checking the rows of dark, silent mines lined up along the rock. Each one was the size of a small vehicle, packed with enough explosive force to crack open the hull of a Zoranth warship in a single hit. There were over 4,000 of them scattered throughout the asteroid field, hidden behind stealth plating that made them nearly invisible to standard sensors. Even the Zoranth, with their advanced technology, would have a hard time spotting them until it was far too late. Naomi had joined the project in its 2nd year, after losing her brother in a border skirmish with Zoranth raiders. She did not talk about it often, but everyone on the project knew the story, the way people know things about each other after working side by side for years under enormous pressure. Her brother had been a pilot, one of the many young men and women sent out in the early days after the First War to patrol humanity's shrinking borders. He had never come home. She had thrown herself into this project the way some people throw themselves into grief, turning pain into purpose, turning purpose into 4 years of relentless, careful work. "Dr. Osei," Tomas said over the comm again. "Admiral Cross wants a full readiness report in 1 hour." "Tell her we'll have it," Naomi said. "Tell her the Veil is ready." Far above the asteroid field, on the bridge of a hidden command ship called the Watchtower, Admiral Elena Cross reviewed report after report, each one arriving faster than she could fully process. Mine readiness, platform readiness, fleet readiness, communication readiness. Every piece of the trap had to work together, perfectly, in a sequence that had been planned down to the second. Marcus Reyes stood beside her, looking paler than usual, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "You should rest," Elena said, not looking up from her display. "I'll rest after this is over," Marcus said. "One way or another." Elena allowed herself a small laugh, tired, but genuine. "That's what I said 4 years ago." "And look where we are now," Marcus said. 3 days from either the greatest victory humanity has ever had, or the end of everything we've spent building it." "Don't talk like that in front of the crew," Elena said, though there was no real anger in her voice. "I won't," Marcus said, "but you and I both know it's true." Elena finally looked up from the display and studied him for a moment. She had known Marcus for almost 6 years now, since he had first pitched the idea for the Iron Veil to a skeptical council of military leaders. Back then, he had been a mid-level engineer, with wild ideas, and not much political standing. It had taken him almost a year just to get someone senior enough to listen to his full plan. "Tell me something," Elena said. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Marcus thought about the question seriously before answering. "I regret that it was necessary," he said. "I regret that we live in a universe where a species can show up, decide we're not worth talking to, and try to wipe us out just because they can. I regret every life we lost building this, every worker who died in accidents during construction, every soldier we've sent into position knowing some of them won't come home." He paused, looking out at the dark shape of the asteroid field stretching out before them. "But I don't regret trying to make sure it never happens to us again," he added. "If this works, no one attacks Earth without knowing they'll pay a terrible price for it. That has to be worth something." Elena nodded slowly. "It does." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the communications console. A young officer named Lieutenant Farrow turned in his seat. "Admiral, We're picking up a transmission from Captain Cole's fleet. They're requesting final coordination details before they move into position. Patch it through, Elena said. The display flickered, and Aiden Cole's face appeared, calm but focused. Behind him, the bridge of the Resolute buzzed with quiet activity. Admiral, Aiden said, my fleet is ready to move to final staging positions within the asteroid belt. We'll be in place a full day before the Zoranth arrive, exactly as planned. Good, Elena said. Remember, once you're in position, absolute silence. No active scans, no communications beyond emergency channels. The entire plan depends on the Zoranth believing this system is empty, until the moment we choose to prove them wrong. Understood, Admiral. My crew has trained for this. We won't fail. I know you won't, Elena said. May whatever gods you believe in watch over all of you. The transmission ended, and Elena leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for just a moment. 3 days. 3 days until 312 Zoranth warships arrived at a system they believed was empty, and found instead the largest and most carefully hidden trap humanity had ever built. Meanwhile, far across the stars, the Zoranth Armada continued its steady approach. Grand Marshal Vorak spent most of his time on the bridge of the devouring storm, watching the slow crawl of stars pass by, growing more impatient by the day. He was not a patient man by nature, and the idea of taking 3 more days just to reach a weak, defenseless human colony felt like a waste of time to him. Send scouts ahead, he ordered on the morning of the 3rd day. I want eyes on this New Haven colony before the main fleet arrives. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. His fleet controller, a broad-shouldered Zoranth named Drask, hesitated for a moment before responding. Grand Marshal, our scans of the target system show nothing unusual. Empty space, a dead star, an asteroid field. No sign of any colony, no sign of any ships. Vorak frowned. The signal came from that system. Yes, Grand Marshal. But whatever sent it may already be destroyed. Perhaps the colony was already wiped out by raiders, as the signal suggested. Perhaps there is nothing left to find. Vorak considered this for a moment, his 3 eyes narrowing in thought. It was possible. Distress signals sometimes arrived long after the crisis they described had already ended, echoing through space for days or weeks before finally reaching a listener. If the colony was already destroyed, there might be nothing left to conquer, no glory to claim, no lesson to teach the wider human species. But there was still the asteroid field. Even if the colony itself was gone, there might be survivors hiding among the rocks, or valuable resources left unclaimed. And even an empty system, once claimed by the Zoranth Armada, would serve as a forward base for future operations against humanity's remaining worlds. Send the scouts, Vorak said finally, but keep the main fleet moving at full speed. I don't intend to waste any more time on this than necessary. If there's nothing there, we claim the system anyway, and move on to find a target worth our attention. Yes, Grand Marshal. 3 scout ships broke away from the main formation, streaking ahead of the Armada toward the system of Meridian Drift. They were fast, sleek vessels, built for speed and stealth rather than combat, equipped with the best sensors the Zoranth possessed. Back on Ashfall, deep in the command bunker, Elena Cross received the news of the approaching scout ships with a calm nod, as if she had expected it all along. Scouts detected 3 ships, moving ahead of the main fleet, Lieutenant Farrow reported. Estimated arrival at Meridian Drift in 6 hours. They're checking the system before committing the whole fleet, Marcus said. Smart, actually. More cautious than I expected from the Zoranth. It doesn't matter, Elena said. We planned for this possibility. The Iron Veil's cloaking is designed to fool exactly this kind of scan. As long as our people stay disciplined, stay silent, and don't panic, those scout ships will see nothing but empty rock and dead space. She turned to Farrow. Send word to every platform, every hidden ship, every mind controller in the field. Full silent protocol. Nothing moves, nothing transmits, nothing so much as flickers until I give the order. Yes, Admiral. 6 hours later, the 3 Zoranth scout ships entered the outer edge of the Meridian Drift asteroid field, their sensors sweeping across the dark, silent rocks. Inside the field, thousands of human soldiers, engineers, and pilots held their breath, watching the scout ships pass overhead on tactical displays, waiting to see if 4 years of careful planning would survive its first real test. Naomi Osei floated silently inside Mine Cluster 7, watching a small display that showed the scout ship's scanning pattern sweeping closer and closer to her position. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay perfectly still, trusting the stealth plating that surrounded her, trusting the years of careful engineering that had gone into making this asteroid look like nothing more than a lump of dead rock. The scanning pulse swept over Mine Cluster 7 and moved on. Naomi let out a slow, shaking breath. Across the field, similar moments played out again and again as the scout ships completed their sweep, finding nothing but empty rock, dead space, and the faint, lingering echo of an old distress signal that had long since gone silent. After nearly 2 hours of scanning, the 3 scout ships turned and began their journey back toward the main fleet, their reports already being transmitted ahead. Grand Marshal Vorak received the news with a satisfied nod. System confirmed empty, aside from natural debris, Drask reported. No sign of any colony, no sign of survivors, no sign of any threat. As I expected, Vorak said. The colony was destroyed before we ever arrived. A shame. I was hoping for a bit more sport. Should we still proceed to the system, Grand Marshal? Vorak considered the question for only a moment. Yes. We'll claim it as a forward base regardless. And perhaps, he added, a cruel smile spreading across his face, we'll send a message to the rest of humanity while we're there. Let them know we found the remains of their little colony, and that we intend to find every other human world just the same way. The order was given, and the full Zoranth Armada adjusted course slightly, heading directly into the heart of the asteroid field at Meridian Drift, utterly confident that they were flying into empty, undefended space. They had no idea that the Scouts' scans had been fooled by technology specifically designed to fool them. They had no idea that beneath the silent rocks, thousands of hidden mines waited, along with cloaked defense platforms and an entire fleet of human warships, all holding their breath, waiting for the signal to strike. Back on Ashfall, Elena Cross watched the tracking display as the Zoranth Armada adjusted its course, moving directly toward the heart of the trap. They're coming, she said quietly. Marcus stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the same display, his jaw tight with tension. 2 days, he said. 2 days until this is finally decided. Elena turned to face the rest of the command room, her voice carrying clearly across the space. Everyone, listen to me, she said. In 2 days, 312 Exoranth warships are going to enter this system, believing it is empty and undefended. They are wrong. When the time comes, every soldier, every engineer, every pilot in this operation will play a part in proving them wrong, and in doing so, we will send a message to every power in this galaxy that humanity is not a species to be trifled with. She paused, letting her words settle over the room. Stay disciplined, stay silent, trust the plan, and trust each other. 2 days from now, we make history. Across the vast, silent expanse of the asteroid field, thousands of hidden soldiers and engineers heard those words relayed through their comm systems, and steadied themselves for what was coming. The Zoranth Armada moved closer with every passing hour, confident, unaware, and utterly unprepared for what awaited them in the shadows of Meridian Drift. That night, in a small mess hall carved into the rock of one of the larger asteroids, a group of off-duty engineers gathered for what might be their last quiet meal before the battle began. Naomi Osei sat near the back of the room, picking at a tray of reconstituted food that tasted like almost nothing, listening to the quiet conversation around her without really joining in. Tomas sat across from her, looking younger than his 26 years, his hands wrapped tightly around a cup of lukewarm coffee. Do you think it'll actually work? He asked quietly, careful not to let his voice carry too far across the crowded room. All of it? Every mine, every platform, exactly the way it's supposed to? Naomi considered the question for a long moment before answering. I've checked Cluster 7 100 times. I trust my own work, but this isn't just my work. It's thousands of people, spread across an entire star system, all of it needing to work together perfectly at exactly the same moment. That's not really an answer, Tomas said, a small nervous smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. No, Naomi agreed. She set down her fork and looked around the crowded mess hall. at the tired, determined faces of the people who had spent years of their lives building something the galaxy had never seen before. Soldiers who had trained for a battle they hoped would finally give their sacrifice meaning. Engineers who had poured their grief and their hope into circuits and wiring and carefully calculated blast radii. Pilots who would soon be flying into the heart of the largest fleet humanity had faced since the First War. "I think about my brother a lot," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "Whenever I doubt any of this, I think about how scared he must have been, at the end, knowing there was nothing left to fight with, no reinforcements coming, nothing but the hope that maybe, somehow, it would be enough." Tomas didn't say anything, just listened, the way people learn to listen when a friend needs to speak without being interrupted. "This time it's different," Naomi continued. "This time we're not scrambling to defend ourselves with whatever's left after they've already broken through our lines. This time we chose the battlefield. We built it ourselves, piece by piece, for 4 years. If it doesn't work perfectly everywhere, it just has to work well enough. That has to count for something." "It will," Tomas said, with more confidence than he probably felt. "You built Cluster 7 yourself. I've watched you check every wire twice. It'll work." Naomi managed a small, tired smile. "Get some sleep, Tomas. Tomorrow's going to be a very long day." Elsewhere in the field, aboard the Resolute, Captain Aiden Cole held a final briefing with his senior officers, going over the timing sequences one last time, making sure every commander under his authority understood exactly when and how their ships would move once the trap was sprung. "Remember," he said, standing before a holographic display of the asteroid field, "our job isn't just to fight. It's to fight at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place. The mines and platforms will do most of the damage in the opening minutes. Our role is to finish what they start, and to make sure no significant portion of that armada escapes, to warn the wider Zoranth Dominion before we're ready for that conversation." Priya Malhotra studied the display carefully. "And if the timing goes wrong? If they enter the field faster or slower than the models predict? Then we adapt," Aiden said simply. "Admiral Cross has given every ship commander enough discretion to respond to changing conditions. We've trained for the plan, but we've also trained for the plan falling apart. That's what real preparation looks like." One of the younger officers in the room, a lieutenant named Okafor who had never seen real combat before, raised a hesitant hand. "Sir, is it true the Xoranth destroyed entire fleets in a matter of hours during the First War?" The room went quiet for a moment. Aiden considered his answer carefully before speaking. "It's true," he said. "I wasn't old enough to fight in that war, but I've read every report, studied every battle. They were faster, stronger, and better equipped than we were. They caught us unprepared, and we paid a terrible price for it." "Then how is this any different?" "Because this time, we're not unprepared," Aiden said. "This time, we know exactly where they're going, exactly when they'll arrive, and exactly what it will take to stop them. We spent 4 years turning that knowledge into the most carefully built trap in human history. The First War taught us we couldn't beat the Zoranth in a fair fight, so we made sure this wouldn't be a fair fight at all." Okafor nodded slowly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders, though not all of it. "Get some rest, all of you," Aiden said, ending the briefing. "Tomorrow, we find out if 4 years of planning was enough." The officers dispersed to their quarters, and Aiden remained alone for a while, staring at the holographic display of the asteroid field, watching the small red dot representing the Zoranth Armada creep steadily closer with each passing hour. He thought about his own family, scattered across several human colonies, people who had no idea what was about to happen in this quiet, forgotten corner of space, people whose safety depended entirely on the outcome of the battle that would begin in less than 48 hours. He thought about the weight of command, the responsibility of leading soldiers into a battle from which some of them would not return, no matter how well the trap had been designed. And finally, he thought about the future, about what it might mean for humanity if this plan succeeded, about a galaxy where their species was no longer hunted, no longer hiding, no longer forced to measure its survival in scattered years of desperate secrecy. It was worth fighting for. It was worth everything they had already given, and everything they might still lose in the hours to come. He powered down the display and made his way to his quarters, knowing that sleep, if it came at all, would be thin and restless, haunted by the same anxious anticipation gripping every soul preparing for battle, across the asteroid field of Meridian Drift. The Xoranth Armada moved closer with every passing hour, confident, unaware, and utterly unprepared for what awaited them in the shadows of Meridian Drift. The Xoranth Armada entered the outer edge of the Meridian Drift asteroid field, exactly on schedule. 312 warships moving in a wide, confident formation, their engines casting a dull orange glow across the dark rocks around them. Grand Marshal Vorak stood on the bridge of the devouring storm, watching the asteroid field pass by on the main view screen. It looked exactly as the scout reports had described. Dead rock, empty space, no sign of life, no sign of danger, nothing but the quiet remains of a system that had never mattered to anyone. "Take us deeper into the field," Vorak ordered. "I want to see the location where the signal originated. If there's anything left of this human colony, I want it found and recorded before we move on." "Yes, Grand Marshal," Drask replied. The Armada pressed forward, warships weaving carefully between the larger asteroids, their sensors sweeping continuously across the rocks around them. Standard procedure, routine caution, nothing that suggested any real fear of danger. Deep inside the asteroid field, hidden behind layers of stealth plating, thousands of human soldiers and engineers watched the enemy fleets approach on their tactical displays, their hearts pounding, their hands steady on the controls of weapons that had waited 4 years for this exact moment. Naomi Osei floated silently inside Mine Cluster 7, watching the shapes of Xoranth warships drift past on her display, some of them close enough that she could make out individual details of their hulls. It was strange, she thought, to be this close to the enemy, close enough to reach out and touch them if the rock around her wasn't in the way, and for them to have no idea she was there at all. "They're right on top of us," Tomas whispered over the comm, his voice tight with tension. "Stay calm," Naomi said, though her own heart was racing. "Stay silent. Wait for the signal." On the bridge of the watchtower, Elena Cross watched the same scene unfold across dozens of tactical displays, tracking the position of every Xoranth warship as it moved deeper into the field. Marcus Reyes stood beside her, his eyes fixed on a countdown timer in the corner of the main screen. "They're moving toward the center of the field faster than we expected," Marcus said. "At this rate, they'll be within optimal strike range in less than 20 minutes. "Good," Elena said. "The deeper they go, the harder it will be for them to retreat once we spring the trap." She turned to Lieutenant Farrow. "Status of Captain Cole's fleet?" "In position, Admiral. Fully cloaked, engines cold, weapons charged and ready. They're waiting for your order." "And the Iron Veil?" "All mine clusters report full readiness. All defense platforms are online and undetected. Gravity disruptors are primed and ready to activate on your command." Elena nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the tactical display, watching the Xoranth Armada spread out further into the heart of the asteroid field, exactly where she needed them to be. "Not yet," she said. "Let them come further in. I want as many of their ships as possible caught inside the kill zone before we strike." The minutes crawled by, each one feeling longer than the last, as the Xoranth Armada continued its slow, confident advance into the trap that had been waiting for it for 4 long years. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Grand Marshal Vorak was growing bored. There was nothing here. No colony, no survivors, no sign of any real threat. Just empty rock and dead space, exactly as the scout reports had promised. "This was a waste of time," he muttered to Drask. "A dying colony's last cry, and nothing left to show for it. Should we withdraw, Grand Marshal?" Vorak considered the question, glancing at the tactical display showing his fleet spread out across the asteroid field. They had come this far. It seemed pointless to leave without at least claiming the system officially, planting a marker, sending a message to any human who might be listening that the Xoranth had been here, and that no corner of the galaxy was safe from them. "No," Vorak said. "We'll finish the survey, claim the system, and then move on to find a more worthwhile target. Send word to the fleet to begin final positioning for the formal claim ceremony." "Yes, Grand Marshal." The order rippled through the fleet, and the Xoranth warships began adjusting their formation, spreading out even further, moving into a wide circular pattern that would place nearly every ship in the Armada deep within the heart of the asteroid field. On the watchtower, Elena Cross watched this new formation take shape with a grim, satisfied expression. "They're spreading out even further," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled excitement. "Admiral, this is it. This is the moment. Nearly their entire fleet is now within the kill zone." Elena studied the tactical display for a long moment, watching the glowing dots representing 312 Zoranth warships settle into their new positions, utterly unaware of the danger surrounding them on every side. She thought about the First War. She thought about all the lives lost, all the years of fear, all the work that had gone into this single moment. She thought about her brother, lost in that First War, and about Naomi Osei's brother, and about the thousands of other names carried by the people who had built and crewed the Iron Veil, each one carrying their own reasons for being here, their own losses, their own hopes for what this moment might mean. "All units," Elena said, her voice steady and clear as it carried across every comm channel in the Iron Veil. "This is Admiral Elena Cross. The moment we have prepared for has arrived." Across the asteroid field, thousands of soldiers, engineers, and pilots straightened at their stations, weapons ready, hands steady, waiting for the final order. 4 years ago, we began building something the galaxy has never seen before, Elena continued. A trap, built not from weakness, but from patience, from discipline, and from the refusal to let our species be destroyed without a fight. Today, that patience pays off. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Grand Marshal Vorak was reviewing the final details of the claim ceremony, utterly unaware that his entire fleet had just been declared the target of the largest ambush in human history. "Activate the Iron Veil," Elena said. "Now." The order rippled across every hidden system in the asteroid field simultaneously. Deep inside Mine Cluster 7, Naomi Osei's hands moved instantly across her control panel, her fingers flying with the speed of countless hours of practice. "Activating Mine Cluster," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Arming sequence initiated. Across the entire asteroid field, 4,000 hidden mines began their activation sequence at once, their stealth plating falling away, their targeting systems locking onto the nearest Zoranth warships with terrifying speed and precision. At the same moment, dozens of cloaked defense platforms scattered throughout the field powered up, their weapons systems charging, their targeting arrays sweeping across the confused, scattered formation of Zoranth ships spread out before them. And deep within the darkest part of the field, Captain Aidan Cole's hidden fleet began its own activation sequence. Engines roaring back to life, weapon systems charging, ready to strike from the shadows the moment the order was given. On the bridge of the devouring storm, the first sign that anything was wrong came in the form of a sudden, urgent alarm. "Grand Marshal!" Drask's voice was sharp with alarm. "Multiple unknown contacts detected throughout the asteroid field. Energy signatures spiking across dozens, no, hundreds of locations." Vorak spun toward the tactical display, his 3 eyes widening as he saw what was happening. All across the asteroid field, previously invisible objects were suddenly becoming visible, their stealth fields collapsing as they powered up for attack, revealing a network of hidden weapons and warships that stretched across the entire system. "This is impossible," Vorak snarled. "There was nothing here. Our scouts confirmed it. Grand Marshal, we're reading thousands of mine signatures, dozens of unknown defense platforms, and multiple warship contacts, emerging from concealment throughout the field. We are surrounded." Vorak's mind raced, trying to understand how this had happened, how a species he had considered weak and broken had managed to build something like this without any warning, without any hint of its existence reaching Zoranth intelligence networks. And then, with a sudden, terrible clarity, he understood. The signal, the distress call, the dying colony that had never existed at all. It had all been bait. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Vorak roared, his earlier confidence shattering into something far more desperate. "Concentrate fire on the nearest threats. We need to break out of this field immediately." But it was already too late. Across the asteroid field, 4,000 mines detonated in a coordinated wave, their explosive force tearing into the hulls of the nearest Zoranth warships with devastating precision. Ships that had been cruising confidently through what they believed was empty space suddenly found themselves engulfed in fire and debris, their armor cracking open under the force of explosions, specifically designed to exploit the weak points in Zoranth ship design. At the same moment, the hidden defense platforms opened fire, their weapons cutting through the confused, scattered Zoranth formation with brutal efficiency. Ships that had spread out for a ceremonial claiming of the system now found themselves isolated, unable to support each other, each one facing the full fury of the Iron Veil alone. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Vorak watched in horror as his tactical display filled with red warning icons, ship after ship reporting critical damage, some vanishing from the display entirely as they were destroyed outright. "Status report," he demanded. "We're losing ships faster than we can count, Grand Marshal," Drask shouted over the growing chaos of alarms and damage reports. "The Vengeance's wrath is gone. The Iron Fang is critically damaged and adrift. We have no clear line of retreat. We're completely surrounded." Vorak's mind raced through his options, each one worse than the last. Retreat seemed impossible, with hidden threats scattered throughout the entire field, ready to strike any ship that tried to flee. Standing and fighting seemed equally hopeless, given the devastating efficiency of the coordinated attack already tearing his fleet apart. "Concentrate all forces toward the center of the field," Vorak ordered, forcing himself to think clearly despite the chaos unfolding around him. "We form a defensive formation, and fight our way out together. No ship moves alone." The order was given, and the surviving Zoranth warships began pulling together, forming a tighter, more defensible formation at the heart of the asteroid field, their weapons turning outward, searching desperately for targets among the shadows and debris surrounding them. It was exactly what Elena Cross had been waiting for. "They're consolidating their formation," Marcus said, watching the tactical display with a mixture of grim satisfaction and disbelief. "Just like we predicted they would." Elena allowed herself a small, tight smile. "Then it's time for the final piece of the trap." She turned to Lieutenant Farrow. "Activate the gravity disruptors, and signal Captain Cole. Tell him it's time to finish this." Across the asteroid field, hidden gravity disruptors buried deep within the largest rocks began their activation sequence, their powerful fields reaching out to grip the tightly packed Zoranth formation, twisting the very fabric of space around them, pulling ships off course, smashing some directly into each other in the chaos and confusion. And from the deepest, darkest shadows of the field, Captain Aidan Cole's hidden fleet finally revealed itself, engines roaring to full power, weapons blazing, as they struck the already devastated Zoranth Armada from an angle no one had anticipated. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Grand Marshal Vorak watched his once mighty Armada collapse into chaos around him, ships colliding, weapons firing wildly in every direction, the confident, disciplined force he had led into this system, only hours before, now reduced to a desperate, scattered mess, fighting for its very survival. "This cannot be happening," he whispered, his earlier arrogance replaced entirely by cold, creeping dread. "We are the Zoranth. We do not lose. We have never lost." But as explosion after explosion lit up the darkness around him, as ship after ship vanished from his tactical display, Vorak began to understand, with terrible clarity, that everything he had believed about humanity, about their weakness, their brokenness, their inability to threaten the Zoranth Armada, had been nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. A lie that had led his entire fleet directly into a trap from which there might be no escape. On the watchtower, the mood inside the command room had shifted from tense anticipation to focused, controlled intensity the moment the first mines detonated. Elena Cross moved between stations, reviewing reports, issuing quiet corrections, her voice never rising above a calm, steady tone, even as the scale of the unfolding battle became clear on every display around her. "Confirmed kills climbing rapidly," Lieutenant Farrow reported. "Early estimates suggest at least 40 enemy vessels destroyed or critically disabled in the opening minutes alone." "And our own losses?" Elena asked. "None reported yet, Admiral. The Iron Veil's static defenses are operating exactly as modeled." Marcus allowed himself a small, tight breath of relief, though his eyes remained fixed on the display, watching for any sign of trouble among the chaos. "The gravity disruptors are performing better than our simulations predicted," he said. "Look at this cluster here, near the eastern edge of the field. 3 enemy ships pulled completely off course and collided with each other before our platforms even needed to fire." "Don't celebrate yet," Elena said. though there was a note of quiet satisfaction in her own voice as well. Vorak is already reorganizing. He's not a fool, whatever else he may be. Watch how quickly his fleet consolidates. Sure enough, on the display, the scattered points representing surviving Zoranth warships began drawing together, forming the tighter defensive cluster that Elena had anticipated only minutes before. He's pulling back toward the center of the field, Marcus observed, trying to minimize exposure to the mines. Which means it's time to remind him that the center of the field isn't safe either, Elena said. Deep inside Mine Cluster 7, Naomi Osei watched with fierce concentration as the readouts on her console shifted and changed, tracking the results of the detonation sequence she had helped design and build over the course of 4 exhausting years. Explosions bloomed across her secondary display, each one representing damage inflicted on an enemy vessel. Each one, a small, hard-won victory in a battle that had barely begun. Cluster 7 reporting 70% of mines successfully detonated, she said into her comm, her voice tight with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief. Remaining 30% held in reserve as planned, in case the enemy attempts to regroup within our sector. Copy that, Cluster 7, came the reply from Central Command. Excellent work. Stand by for further instructions. Naomi allowed herself a brief moment to simply breathe, staring at the chaos unfolding on her display. The wreckage of Zoranth warships tumbling silently through the dark, debris catching the dim light of the distant red dwarf star at the heart of the system. We actually did it, Tomas said over the comm, his voice trembling slightly. Naomi, we actually did it. Look at them. It's not over, Naomi said, though she couldn't quite keep the note of fierce, exhausted pride out of her own voice. Not even close. But yes, we did exactly what we set out to do. Across the asteroid field, similar scenes played out in dozens of other mine clusters and defense platforms, each crew watching the results of years of careful work unfold in real time. Each one aware that the battle was far from finished, that the most dangerous phase of the fight, the direct confrontation between human and Zoranth warships, was only just beginning. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Grand Marshal Vorak forced himself to set aside his shock and focus entirely on the immediate crisis facing his fleet. Whatever had happened, whatever trap had been sprung around them, dwelling on the how and why would accomplish nothing. Only decisive action could give his remaining ships any chance of survival. Drask, he said, his voice regaining some of its earlier authority despite the chaos surrounding them. I want a full accounting of our remaining combat strength within the next 2 minutes. Every ship, every weapon system, every scrap of firepower we still have available. Yes, Grand Marshal. Vorak turned his attention to the tactical display, studying the pattern of explosions and enemy contacts with the trained eye of a commander who had fought in dozens of engagements across his long career. There was a structure to this attack, a discipline that spoke of careful, patient planning rather than desperate improvisation. Whoever had built this trap had thought through every stage of the coming battle, anticipating not just the initial ambush, but the responses a Zoranth commander would naturally make in its aftermath. That realization was, in its own way, more disturbing than the losses themselves. It suggested an enemy far more capable than anything Zoranth intelligence had prepared him to expect. Grand Marshal, Drask reported, current combat strength is approximately 204 vessels, though a significant number report damage to weapons, shields, or propulsion systems. 204 ships, still more than enough in theory, to overwhelm whatever mobile human fleet might be lurking within the asteroid field, provided they could avoid further losses to the hidden mines and platforms that had already devastated their formation. Order the fleet to consolidate around my position, Vorak said. We form the tightest possible defensive cluster, and fight our way out together. Broadcast to all ships. Discipline now, or death for all of us. The order rippled through what remained of the Zoranth Armada, and slowly, painfully, the surviving ships began pulling together, forming a defensive formation at the heart of the asteroid field, weapons turned outward, sensors straining to detect the hidden dangers that had already cost them so dearly. It was, Vorak knew, exactly the kind of response any competent Zoranth commander would make under these circumstances. He had no way of knowing that this exact response, this exact instinct toward disciplined consolidation, was precisely what Elena Cross and Marcus Reyes had spent months modeling and planning for, down to the smallest detail. The trap had not finished springing. It had only just begun. The battle inside the asteroid field of Meridian Drift had become something closer to chaos than combat. Zoranth warships, once arranged in a proud, confident formation, now tumbled through space in broken clusters, some firing wildly at shadows, some drifting helplessly with dead engines, some simply gone, torn apart by mines or collisions, or the relentless fire of hidden human weapons. Debris filled the space between the asteroids, glowing hot from explosions, spinning slowly in the vacuum, like a graveyard being built in real time. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Grand Marshal Vorak fought to hold his fleet together, shouting orders over the chaos of alarms and damage reports flooding in from every direction. "Reform around the flagship," he roared. "All surviving vessels, converge on my position. We fight as one, or we die scattered." Slowly, painfully, the surviving Zoranth ships began pulling together, forming a tighter defensive cluster around the devouring storm. It was a fraction of the force that had entered the system only hours before. Of the 312 warships that had followed the human signal into Meridian Drift, barely 200 remained, and many of those were already damaged, their weapons and shields weakened by the initial ambush. "Report," Vorak demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Drask's reply came haltingly, each word heavy with the weight of what he was describing. "We have lost over 100 ships, Grand Marshal. The mines accounted for the majority of early losses. The gravity disruptors caused significant additional casualties through collisions, and the unknown enemy fleet that emerged from the shadows continues to strike at our flanks. Where is this enemy fleet now?" "Difficult to track precisely, Grand Marshal. They appear to be using the asteroid field itself as cover, striking quickly and then retreating back into concealment before we can effectively return fire." Vorak's claws dug into the arms of his command chair. This was not how the Zoranth fought wars. They fought with overwhelming force, with discipline, with the certainty of superior technology and superior numbers. They did not fight enemies who could vanish into shadows, who could turn an entire star system into a weapon, who could make an empty asteroid field into the deadliest battlefield the Zoranth had faced in a generation. On the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Aidan Cole watched his own tactical display with fierce concentration, guiding his fleet through another hit-and-run strike against the reforming Zoranth cluster. "Fire pattern Delta," he ordered. "Concentrate on their damaged flank ships. Take out the wounded before they can regroup." "Firing," Priya Malhotra confirmed, her hands moving swiftly across her console. The Resolute and a dozen other human warships emerged briefly from the cover of a large asteroid, unleashing a coordinated volley of fire directly into a cluster of damaged Zoranth vessels struggling to reach the main formation. Explosions bloomed across the enemy ships as the human weapons found their marks, and just as quickly, the human fleet retreated back into the shadows of the asteroid field, vanishing from Zoranth sensors before any effective counterattack could be organized. "That's another 4 ships down," Priya reported, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. "Keep the pressure on," Aidan said, "but stay disciplined. We can't afford to get overextended, no matter how well this is going." On the watchtower, Elena Cross watched the battle unfold, across a dozen tactical displays, her expression calm, but intensely focused. Marcus Reyes stood beside her, tracking the steadily climbing count of destroyed Zoranth ships, with a mixture of grim satisfaction and lingering tension. "We're inflicting massive casualties," Marcus said, "but they're still fighting hard. This isn't over yet." "It won't be over until every one of their ships is destroyed or driven from this system," Elena said. "Vorak still has more than half his fleet intact. If he manages to organize an effective retreat, we could still lose a significant number of ships trying to finish this." "What's our status?" "The Iron Veil's mines are largely spent in the areas closest to the initial engagement," Elena said, studying a resource report on a secondary display. "We have reserves further out in the field, but Vorak's forces are pulling back from those zones, consolidating instead near the center." "Smart," Marcus admitted. "He's trying to minimize his exposure to the mines by keeping his ships in already cleared space. Which means we need Cole's fleet and the remaining defense platforms to finish what the mines started," Elena said. "Send the order. All remaining forces converge on the Zoranth cluster. It's time to end this." The order rippled across the Iron Veil, and every remaining human asset in the system began moving toward the heart of the battle, converging on the desperate, battered remains of the Zoranth Armada. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Vorak watched his tactical display with growing horror as new contacts began appearing from every direction. Human warships emerging from the shadows of the asteroid field in numbers he had not anticipated. "How many ships do they have?" he demanded. "Unclear, Grand Marshal," Drask replied, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "New contacts are appearing constantly. Our sensors suggest at least 50 vessels, possibly more, along with continued mine and platform activity throughout the field. 50 ships. It was a fraction of the size of the Zoranth Armada, even in its current battered state. And yet those 50 ships, combined with the devastating effectiveness of the hidden mines and platforms, had already inflicted losses that would have taken a much larger conventional force to achieve. Vorak forced himself to think clearly, pushing past the anger and disbelief clouding his judgment. He was still the Grand Marshal of a fleet that outnumbered the visible human forces by a significant margin. If he could organize an effective counterattack, focus his remaining firepower on destroying the human warships directly, rather than trying to navigate around the hidden mines, he might still be able to turn this battle around. "All ships, target the human warships directly," Vorak ordered. "Ignore the mines and platforms where possible. If we can destroy their mobile fleet, the static defenses alone will not be enough to finish us." It was, Elena Cross would later admit, a reasonably intelligent decision given the circumstances. But it came far too late to change the outcome of the battle. The Zoranth fleet turned its full attention toward the human warships weaving through the asteroid field, unleashing a storm of return fire that finally began to inflict real damage on Aiden Cole's forces. "We're taking hits," Priya reported, her voice tense, as the Resolute shuddered under a direct impact, shields down to 60%. "Keep firing," Aiden said, gripping the arms of his chair, as another impact rocked the ship. "We knew this stage of the fight would get harder. Hold formation and trust the plan." Across the battlefield, human ships began taking increasingly heavy fire, as the surviving Zoranth warships, now fighting with the desperate fury of cornered animals, focused everything they had on destroying the mobile threat in front of them. 2 human warships were lost in quick succession, their hulls breached by concentrated Zoranth fire, their crews evacuating into escape pods that scattered into the dark, hoping to be recovered before the battle's chaos claimed them too. On the watchtower, Elena watched the mounting human casualties with a tight, controlled expression, forcing herself to focus on the larger picture, rather than the immediate losses. "We're losing ships," Marcus said quietly. "I know," Elena said. "But look at their formation. They've abandoned the defensive cluster to chase mobility. They're spreading out again, right back into the parts of the field where our remaining mines and platforms are still active." Marcus studied the tactical display and realized she was right. In their desperate attempt to hunt down and destroy the human warships, the surviving Zoranth ships had broken formation once again, scattering across the asteroid field in pursuit of an enemy that could vanish into the shadows at will. "Send the order to Cole," Elena said. "Draw them further out. Lead them back into the active minefields." Aboard the Resolute, Aiden Cole received the order and immediately understood the strategy behind it. "All ships, execute pattern echo," he ordered. "We're the bait now. Lead them into Sector 12. The human fleet adjusted course, appearing to retreat in a somewhat disorganized fashion, drawing the pursuing Zoranth warships deeper into a section of the asteroid field that had not yet been fully cleared of active mines. Grand Marshal Vorak, watching his own tactical display, saw what appeared to be a human fleet in retreat and made the decision that would ultimately seal the fate of his armada. "Pursue," he ordered. "Don't let them escape. Finish them now while we have the advantage." The surviving Zoranth warships surged forward in pursuit, chasing the retreating human fleet directly into Sector 12 of the asteroid field, a region still thick with hidden, undetonated mines. The result was immediate and devastating. Explosion after explosion tore through the pursuing Zoranth formation as they entered the minefield, their sensors too focused on tracking the fleeing human ships to properly scan for the hidden dangers surrounding them. Ship after ship was crippled or destroyed outright, the pursuit collapsing into chaos, as the Zoranth fleet once again found itself caught in a trap of its own overconfidence. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Vorak watched in stunned silence as his tactical display filled once more with destruction. ship after ship vanishing or reporting critical damage as the minefield claimed its toll. "We walked directly into another trap," Drask said, his voice barely above a whisper. Vorak said nothing for a long moment, staring at the display, at the wreckage of what had once been the largest and most feared armada in this sector of space, now reduced to a scattered, broken remnant, fighting for survival in a system he had entered expecting nothing more than an easy, forgettable victory. "How many ships remain?" he finally asked. "Fewer than 80, Grand Marshal," Drask said, "and many of those are critically damaged. 80 ships, from an armada of over 300. In the span of a single engagement, humanity had destroyed nearly 3/4 of the most powerful fleet the Xoranth had ever committed to this region of space." Vorak stared at the wreckage-filled display, and for the first time in his long career as a Xoranth commander, he felt something he had rarely experienced before. Fear. Not the fear of losing a battle. Every commander understood that battles could be lost. This was something deeper, something more unsettling. It was the fear of having fundamentally misjudged an enemy, of having walked into a trap so carefully constructed, so patiently planned, that it called into question everything he thought he understood about humanity, about their capabilities, and about the true nature of the threat they represented. "Grand Marshal," Drask said carefully. "Orders?" Vorak was silent for a long moment, staring at the ruins of his once great armada, scattered across the dark, silent asteroid field of Meridian Drift. "Signal all remaining ships," he finally said, his voice heavy with something that sounded almost like defeat. "We attempt a full retreat, immediately." But even as the order left his mouth, Vorak understood, with cold certainty, that escaping this system alive was no longer something he could guarantee. The trap had been built too well, and the humans, it seemed, were only just getting started. Aboard the Resolute, the strain of continuous combat was beginning to show on the faces of the crew. Priya Malhotra's hands moved with slightly less precision than they had hours earlier, exhaustion creeping into every motion despite her best efforts to hide it. Around her, officers and technicians worked through the fatigue, driven forward by adrenaline, and the knowledge that the battle was finally turning decisively in humanity's favor. "Captain, we're reading significant disorganization among the remaining Xoranth vessels," Priya reported. "Multiple ships breaking away from what's left of their formation. Some appear to be attempting independent maneuvers rather than following centralized orders." Aidan Cole studied the tactical display, watching the chaotic scattering of enemy contacts with a mixture of grim satisfaction and lingering caution. "Don't get complacent," he said. "A wounded, desperate enemy can still be dangerous. Maybe more dangerous than a disciplined one, in some ways. Desperate commanders make unpredictable choices." "Understood, Captain." Across the fleet, human ships continued their coordinated assault, picking off isolated Xoranth vessels, while avoiding direct confrontation with any remaining concentrations of enemy firepower. It was a strategy built on patience and precision, exactly the kind of fighting the Iron Veil had been designed to enable, using the terrain of the asteroid field itself as both weapon and shield. On the watchtower, Elena Cross received a series of updated reports, her expression remaining calm even as the scale of the Xoranth Armada's destruction became increasingly clear. "Current estimate places enemy losses at over 230 vessels," Lieutenant Farrow reported. "Remaining combat-capable ships number fewer than 80, with several dozen more classified as critically damaged and effectively non-combat capable." "And our losses?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the weight of genuine concern despite the overwhelming success of the operation so far. 9 warships lost, Admiral. Casualties are still being confirmed, but early estimates suggest significant loss of life aboard at least 4 of those vessels. Elena absorbed the number with a slow, measured breath. 9 ships. Hundreds of lives, likely, lost in service of a plan that had, by any reasonable measure, succeeded beyond even the most optimistic projections made during 4 years of careful preparation. "Send my condolences to the families, once this is over," she said quietly. "Every one of them." "Yes, Admiral." Marcus Reyes stood nearby, watching the tactical display with an expression that mixed exhaustion, grief, and a fierce, quiet pride that he found difficult to fully put into words. He thought of the countless engineers, workers, and soldiers who had given years of their lives, and in some cases, their lives entirely, to make this moment possible. "It's working," he said softly, almost to himself. "After everything, it's actually working." "It's not over," Elena reminded him gently, though there was no harshness in her tone. "Vorak still commands a significant force, and he's not going to simply hand us a complete victory. Watch." As if on cue, new reports began flooding in from across the battlefield, describing the Zoranth fleet's sudden, aggressive shift in tactics, abandoning their earlier defensive posture in favor of a direct, concentrated assault against the human warships harassing their flanks. "They're changing strategy," Marcus observed, watching the Zoranth formation reorganize on the display. "Direct confrontation, instead of trying to avoid the mines." "Vorak is smarter than we might have hoped," Elena said. "He's realized that avoiding the static defenses means engaging the mobile fleet directly. It's a reasonable decision, given his circumstances. Signal Cole. Tell him to expect increased pressure and to fall back toward the pre-planned secondary positions if needed." The order was relayed immediately, and across the asteroid field, human commanders began adjusting their tactics in response to the Zoranth fleet's renewed aggression, falling back carefully toward positions that would allow them to continue inflicting damage while minimizing their own exposure to the concentrated firepower of the enemy's remaining warships. The battle raged on for nearly another hour in this fashion, a brutal, grinding exchange of fire, as the surviving Zoranth ships fought with the desperate ferocity of cornered predators, inflicting real, painful losses on the human fleet, even as their own numbers continued to dwindle under the combined pressure of mobile human warships and the Iron Veil's remaining static defenses. By the time Grand Marshal Vorak gave the order to pursue what appeared to be a retreating human fleet into Sector 12, both sides had been fighting continuously for the better part of 6 hours, exhaustion and desperation shaping decisions on both sides of the conflict in equal measure. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of desperate, high-risk decision that a cornered commander, fighting for the survival of his fleet and his own reputation, was almost destined to make. And it was exactly the decision Elena Cross and Marcus Reyes had spent months preparing for, certain that when the moment came, pride and desperation would push Grand Marshal Vorak toward exactly this kind of costly mistake. The order to retreat spread through the shattered remains of the Zoranth Armada like a whisper of panic, ship after ship breaking away from the fight, trying desperately to find a path out of the asteroid field that would not lead them straight into another hidden minefield or another wave of human warships striking from the shadows. But retreat, Grand Marshal Vorak quickly discovered, was not going to be simple. "Grand Marshal, the human fleet is moving to cut off our primary escape routes," Drask reported, his voice tight with barely controlled desperation. "They appear to have anticipated a retreat attempt." On the bridge of the watchtower, Elena Cross watched the Zoranth fleet's desperate attempt to flee, with the same calm, focused expression she had maintained throughout the entire battle. "Of course they anticipated it," she said quietly. "We planned for every stage of this fight, including what happens when they realize they're losing." She turned to Lieutenant Farrow. "Signal Captain Cole. It's time to close the door." Aboard the Resolute, Aiden Cole received the order and immediately relayed new instructions to his fleet. "All ships, move to intercept positions along vectors 7 through 12, he ordered. "We're not letting this armada limp home to warn the rest of the Goranth Dominion about what happened here. Not yet, anyway. We want them to understand exactly what they're dealing with before any of them get to leave." The human fleet moved with practiced precision, sliding into position along the most likely escape routes out of the asteroid field, cutting off avenue after avenue for the retreating Zoranth ships. Combined with the remaining active mines and defense platforms still scattered throughout the field, the trap that had already devastated the Zoranth Armada now closed even tighter around its surviving remnants. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Vorak watched his tactical display with a growing, hollow sense of dread, as escape route after escape route was systematically closed off by human forces. "They're not just trying to defend this system," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They intend to destroy us completely." "What are your orders, Grand Marshal?" Drask asked. Vorak was silent for a long moment, staring at the wreckage of his fleet, at the scattered, desperate remnants of what had once been the pride of the Zoranth military presence in this sector of space. 80 ships remained, and even that number was shrinking with every passing minute, as human forces continued their relentless, coordinated assault. He thought about the pride he had felt only days before, following what he believed was an easy, meaningless distress signal toward an effortless victory. He thought about the confidence with which he had dismissed any possibility that humanity, a species that Zoranth had already defeated once, could pose any real threat to his armada. He had been wrong. Catastrophically, devastatingly wrong. "All remaining ships," Vorak finally said, his voice carrying a weight it had never held before. "Concentrate fire toward Vector 9. We break through, together, or we do not break through at all." The surviving Zoranth ships turned as one, directing every remaining weapon toward the human forces blocking Vector 9, the narrowest and least heavily defended of the potential escape routes. It was a desperate gamble, throwing everything they had left into a single, concentrated push, hoping that sheer firepower could carve a path through the human blockade before the rest of the trap finished them off entirely. On the watchtower, Elena watched this final, desperate maneuver unfold with careful attention. "They're concentrating everything on Vector 9, Marcus said. "That's a smart move. If they can break through there, some of them might actually escape." "We anticipated this too," Elena said. "Signal Cole. Execute contingency Foxtrot." Aboard the Resolute, Aiden Cole received the new order and immediately understood what was being asked of him and his fleet. "All ships, fall back from Vector 9, but maintain firing positions," he ordered. "Let them think they're breaking through. Draw them into the corridor." The human fleet appeared to retreat under the concentrated Zoranth assault, pulling back just enough to create the illusion of a collapsing blockade, drawing the desperate remnants of the Zoranth Armada directly into a narrow corridor of the asteroid field that had been specifically reserved for exactly this scenario. It was, Elena Cross would later explain to her officers, the final piece of the Iron Veil's design. A corridor, lined on both sides with concealed weapon platforms, positioned to create a devastating crossfire against any enemy foolish or desperate enough to attempt a breakout through this particular route. Grand Marshal Vorak, seeing what appeared to be a genuine gap in the human defenses, gave the order to push forward with everything his fleet had left. "Full speed, all remaining ships," he commanded. "This is our chance. Break through now." The surviving Zoranth warships surged forward into the corridor, engines burning at maximum capacity, weapons blazing as they pushed toward what they believed was their only path to survival. The concealed weapon platforms activated simultaneously along both sides of the corridor. The resulting crossfire was devastating. Ship after Zoranth ship was caught in a relentless storm of concentrated fire from both directions, their shields overwhelmed, their hulls torn open, their engines destroyed before they could complete even half the length of the narrow corridor. On the bridge of the devouring storm, Vorak watched in horrified silence as ship after ship of his rapidly diminishing fleet was destroyed around him, the corridor that had seemed like their salvation, transforming instead into a final, brutal killing ground. "Grand Marshal, we have taken direct hits to primary engines," Drask reported, his voice strained with the sounds of alarms blaring across the bridge. "Shields are failing. We will not survive another concentrated volley." Vorak stared at the wreckage surrounding his flagship, at the burning remains of an armada that had entered this system only a day before as the largest and most powerful force the Zoranth had committed to this sector in years. Now, fewer than 20 ships remained, scattered and broken, with no clear path to escape and no realistic hope of victory. He thought, in that final moment, about the very first message that had drawn them into this system, a weak, broken distress signal, calling for help that would never come, because the colony that supposedly sent it had never existed at all. It had been bait. Perfectly, patiently constructed bait, designed specifically to exploit the very confidence and arrogance that had made the Zoranth such a feared power across so many conquered worlds. And his armada, and by extension, the entire Zoranth dominion, had walked directly into it without a moment's real suspicion. "Signal the remaining ships," Vorak said quietly, his earlier fury and desperation finally giving way to something closer to resignation. "All ships still capable of independent flight are to attempt individual escape, every commander for themselves. There is no more unified retreat possible." It was, in effect, an admission of complete and total defeat. On the watchtower, Elena Cross watched the scattered remnants of the Zoranth fleet break apart entirely. each surviving ship attempting its own desperate escape, in whatever direction seemed least defended. "They're breaking formation completely," Marcus reported. "It's every ship for itself now." Elena studied the tactical display for a long moment, watching the chaotic, desperate scattering of what remained of the once proud Zoranth Armada. "Let some of them go," she said finally. Marcus turned to her, surprised. "Admiral?" "We've made our point," Elena said. "We've destroyed the vast majority of their fleet. If we hunt down and destroy every single surviving ship, we send a message of pure annihilation. But if we let a handful escape, badly damaged, thoroughly defeated, carrying word back to the rest of the Zoranth Dominion about exactly what happened here, we send a different message entirely." "What message is that?" Marcus asked. "That humanity is no longer an easy target," Elena said. "That we are capable of not just defending ourselves, but of turning the enemy's own confidence against them. Let them tell that story. Let it spread. Let every Zoranth commander who hears it think twice before they ever consider attacking Earth or any human colony again." Marcus considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Signal all forces," Elena continued. "Focus fire only on ships attempting to regroup or coordinate. Allow individually fleeing vessels to escape the system, provided they pose no further threat." The order was given, and across the battlefield, human forces adjusted their tactics accordingly, continuing to destroy any remaining pockets of organized Zoranth resistance, while allowing scattered, individually fleeing ships to make their escape into the wider darkness of space. Among those allowed to escape was the badly damaged Devouring Storm, its engines barely functioning, its hull scarred and broken, carrying Grand Marshal Vorak and a skeleton crew away from the battlefield that had shattered his once mighty armada. As the flagship limped away from Meridian Drift, Vorak stood on his damaged bridge, staring back at the distant, fading lights of the battle he had lost. A battle that had begun with a simple distress signal and ended with the near-total destruction of the largest fleet he had ever commanded. He understood, with cold, absolute certainty, that the report he would deliver to the Zoranth Dominion's high command would change everything. No longer would humanity be dismissed as a broken, defeated species, hiding in fear after their first encounter with Zoranth power. No longer would any commander approach a human world with the same careless confidence that had led his armada into this devastating trap. Humanity had sent a message, written in fire and wreckage across the asteroid field of Meridian Drift, and it was a message the entire galaxy would soon hear. Back on Ashfall, in the command bunker deep beneath the surface, Elena Cross received the final reports as the battle wound down. Of the 312 Zoranth warships that had entered the system, only 17 had managed to escape, each one badly damaged, none of them capable of mounting any further threat in the immediate future. Human losses, while real and painful, had been remarkably light compared to the devastation inflicted on the enemy. 12 warships lost, along with the soldiers, pilots, and engineers who had died aboard them, names that would be remembered and honored for as long as humanity told the story of this battle. Marcus Reyes stood beside Elena as the final casualty reports came in, his expression a complex mixture of exhaustion, grief, and quiet, disbelieving triumph. "We did it," he said softly. 4 years of planning, of building, of sacrifice, and we actually did it. Elena nodded slowly, looking out at the tactical display one final time, watching the last remnants of the Zoranth Armada vanish from human sensors as they fled the system. "We did," she said. "But this isn't the end, Marcus. This is just the beginning." "What do you mean?" "The Zoranth Dominion is vast," Elena said. "Far larger than the single armada we just destroyed. When word of this battle reaches their high command, they won't simply accept the loss and move on. They'll want answers. They'll want revenge. And eventually, they'll come back, with a force far larger than what we face today." Marcus considered this for a long moment. "Then we keep building. We keep preparing. We show them, every time they come, that humanity is not something they can simply erase from the galaxy." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first genuine moment of relief she had felt in longer than she could remember. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what we do." Across the asteroid field of Meridian Drift, human ships began the long, careful process of recovering the wounded, honoring the dead, and repairing what damage the battle had caused to the Iron Veil's remaining defenses. The trap that had been built in secret over 4 long years had done exactly what it was designed to do, and in doing so, it had changed the course of humanity's future in the wider galaxy forever. Word of the battle spread slowly at first, carried by the handful of Zoranth ships that managed to limp back to friendly territory, and then more quickly as it reached the ears of other species who had long lived in fear of the Zoranth Dominion's power. A species once considered weak, broken, and easily dismissed had turned the tables completely, luring an entire armada into a trap so carefully constructed that it had destroyed nearly the whole force in a single, devastating engagement. Humanity, it seemed, was no longer a species to be underestimated. On the bridge of the heavily damaged devouring storm, Grand Marshal Vorak stared out at the stars, already composing in his mind the report he would deliver to the Zoranth Dominion's high command, a report that would forever change how his people viewed the small, fragile-seeming world called Earth. They had followed a human signal, confident it would lead them to an easy victory. Instead, it had led them straight into a trap that would be remembered, by both species, for generations to come. And somewhere among the stars, humanity continued to watch, and wait, and build, ready for whatever came next. In the days that followed the battle, the asteroid field of Meridian Drift slowly transformed from a battlefield into something closer to a memorial. Recovery crews moved carefully through the wreckage, searching for survivors among the debris, both human and Zoranth, though the number of enemy survivors found alive was small. Zoranth ships, built for offense rather than crew survivability, had not fared well against the kind of concentrated, precise destruction the Iron Veil had been designed to deliver. Naomi Osei spent those days assisting with the recovery efforts, floating once again through the tunnels of Mine Cluster 7, now silent and spent, checking for any remaining hazards before the area could be declared fully secure. It felt strange, she thought, to walk through the same tunnels that had so recently been filled with the tension of imminent battle, now quiet, almost peaceful, littered with the spent housings of mines that had done exactly what they were built to do. Tomas found her there, on the 3rd day after the battle, staring silently at an empty mine housing, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Naomi took a long moment before answering. "I keep thinking about how strange it is. We spent 4 years building something whose entire purpose was destruction, whose entire purpose was to kill as many of them as efficiently as possible. And now that it's worked, now that we've won, I don't feel the way I thought I would." "How do you feel?" "Tired," she said honestly. "Sad, in a way I didn't expect. Relieved mostly, but not triumphant, not really." Tomas nodded slowly, floating down beside her in the quiet tunnel. "I think that's probably the right way to feel," he said. "We didn't do this because we wanted a war. We did it because we didn't want to lose one, ever again. There's a difference." Naomi allowed herself a small, tired smile. "My brother would have liked you, I think." "I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. Elsewhere in the recovering fleet, Captain Aidan Cole stood at a small memorial service, held aboard the Resolute, honoring the crew members lost during the battle. It was a simple ceremony, names read aloud, a moment of silence observed by the entire remaining crew, a small plaque added to a growing wall of remembrance that had been maintained aboard the ship since its commissioning. "We did not choose this war," Aidan said to the assembled crew, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "It was chosen for us, 20 years ago, by an enemy who believed we were too weak to matter, too broken to ever pose a real threat again. Today, we proved them wrong, and we paid a price for that victory, that we will carry with us for the rest of our lives." He paused, looking out at the faces of his crew, some grieving, some exhausted, all of them carrying the weight of what they had just been through. "Let us honor those we lost, not just with words, but with the promise that their sacrifice meant something, that because of what happened here, fewer families will have to bury their loved ones in the wars still to come. That is the only kind of victory worth having." Back on Ashfall, Elena Cross and Marcus Reyes stood together in the quiet aftermath of the battle, reviewing the final reports that would soon be sent to the highest levels of human government, detailing the full scope of what had been accomplished at Meridian Drift. "The Council is going to want to know what comes next," Marcus said. "Now that the plan worked, Now that we've proven the Iron Veil concept was sound, they're going to want more of them. More traps, more hidden defenses, more preparation for the war we both know is probably still coming. They'll get it, Elena said, but not right away. First, we need to understand exactly what this victory means, and exactly how the Xoranth Dominion is likely to respond to it. What do you think happens next? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. I think for a while, they'll be cautious. An armada of this size, destroyed almost completely by a species they considered beneath serious concern, will force some hard conversations within their command structure. They'll want to understand how it happened before they commit to any large-scale response. And after that? After that, Elena said, they'll come back. Maybe not immediately, maybe not even within the next few years. But eventually, they'll come back, and next time, they'll come prepared for exactly the kind of trap we just used against them. We can't count on surprise working twice. Marcus absorbed this with a slow nod. Then we keep building. Different traps, different strategies. We make sure that whatever they bring next time, we're ready for it too. That's exactly what we do, Elena agreed. This victory buys us time, Marcus. Nothing more, and nothing less. It's up to us to make sure we use that time as wisely as we used the last 20 years. Far beyond the quiet, still recovering asteroid field of Meridian Drift, word of the battle continued to spread across the galaxy, carried by traders, diplomats, and the handful of surviving Xoranth ships that had limped home with news of an unprecedented defeat. Species who had lived for generations, under the shadow of Xoranth power, began to whisper, cautiously, about a small, once broken species called humanity, that had somehow found a way to turn overwhelming defeat into a devastating, decisive victory. It was not the end of humanity's struggle for survival in a galaxy filled with far larger, far older powers. Elena Cross knew that better than anyone, and she made certain that every officer, every engineer, and every soldier who had fought at Meridian Drift understood it as well. But it was, undeniably, a turning point, a moment when a hunted, hiding species had finally stood its ground and proven, beyond any doubt, that it could not simply be erased whenever a more powerful enemy decided it was convenient to do so. The Armada had followed a human signal, confident it would lead them to an easy, forgettable victory. Instead, it had led them straight into Earth's trap, and in doing so, had changed the future of humanity's place among the stars forever. Somewhere among the quiet, drifting wreckage of the battle, a new story had begun, one that would be told and retold for generations to come, a story of patience, sacrifice, and the quiet, unbreakable will of a species that refused to be forgotten,